Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 807. I had the white pieces started off with e4. My opponent went e5. So we go knight f3, he goes knight c6, and we get to the Ruy Lopez after I played bishop b5. And now he plays the move d6. You can see that's pretty well down on the list, although it's in this group of moves here. So the two main moves are a6 and knight f6, and then there's all these kind of sideline moves, the Schlieffen Gambit, the early bishop c5. Yeah, I don't know the names of all of them. But this one is called the old Steinitz defense. The modern Steinitz, by the way, is playing with a6 first, kicking the bishop back, and then playing with d6. And it's a little more accurate if you want to play this system. So this is not supposed to be the greatest opening, but on the other hand, I've actually played a setup like this myself as black. It is kind of hard for white to break down. And particularly in a blitz game, if your opponent is not familiar with this system, it can be kind of an annoying defense to deal with. So I've actually won some points playing with black that way. But in general, black is left with a slightly worse position, the cramped structure, and as we saw in this game, often a damaged pawn structure. So let's see, he went ahead and took. He could try and hold on to things for a while with bishop to d7. I think that's the most common way to play it, and that's how I would play. Let's see, did I go through that? No, I gave it another example later. So let's just go with the game. He took, I took with the knight. I think that's better than taking with the queen. I mean, the queen is, when you put the queen out here, you're taking advantage of the pin. Black is going to block immediately, and then that forces this exchange that we saw in the game. If you take with the knight, it's kind of a little more flexible. You're also taking advantage of the pin, but you're waiting and then deciding later if you want to exchange there or not. You're not forced to take right away here. So I went ahead and castled. It seems like knight c3 is the best move here. But castling is okay. I looked at this with the chess engine. And then he went a6. So I think a6 we're sort of really wandering away from the best play in this line. So a normal continuation would go like this: knight f6, knight c3. And we could have gotten this into this position from different move orders. And this is a kind of setup where black does have the and now white finally exchanges. So white usually does exchange out on c6 at some point anyway. But you can see that black has managed to get castled and get his pieces off the back rank, but it is kind of a compact setup. So it's somewhat cramped, but like I said, it's hard to break down, so nothing really terrible happens. And you can play a long game. Let's see. So a6, he kind of forces the issue right away, and I went ahead and took. It wasn't a move in the book, but actually there was only one game in the book at this point. I looked at it as actually either taking with the knight or the bishop is those are the two best moves in this position. There's nothing to be gained by retreating at this point. So you might as well exchange out and then try and take advantage of this damaged pawn structure here. So I decided to go with the fianchetto. That's certainly not the only way to play. You could just play knight c3 there. That'd be normal development. That's fine too. So he goes knight f6. I went knight d2, protecting the pawn. Actually, that was a bit unnecessary. I could have just played bishop to b2 here. That would have been a better continuation. He can't take that pawn anyway because of the the pin. If he takes the pawn, his knight will get captured, so he'll lose a knight for a couple of pawns. So that's no good. So I could have just played that anyway. I played knight d2. Maybe I would have played that anyway, so it's not horrible, but it was not necessary. He kicks my knight back and plays bishop to e7, getting ready to castle, and I go bishop b2. So and he castles. So we get all of our pieces out, and I should continue. I suppose the most active way of playing is with rook to e1. But I was trying to set up some tactic with this pawn to e5 push like we saw in the game. So the move I played actually worked, but probably not the most accurate move here, this h3 move, just because there are better moves like rook e1. And if he didn't play c6, if he had just continued with normal development like rook to e8, it's very hard for me to prove any kind of advantage here. So e5, he would move the knight, And if I take and he takes back, well, he has a backwards d pawn. We'll probably get to that. But I would really try to encourage him to take. So I'd play something like knight to c4. And he continues to avoid taking. So I think in the long run, white ends up taking and black takes back. And I have this backwards d pawn to play against. But it's not a huge edge. In fact, the chess engine rates it as about even. So this h3 move, combined with my other moves, has sort of given away that opening advantage that I had. After he played a6, I had a pretty big advantage, at least in the chess engine's eyes. Let's see, but he went with c6, so this gives me that advantage right back, because now I can play this e5 move. And, little tricks like this, you always want to keep your eye out for them, both on offense and on defense. I mean, I'm sure black was thinking that it would be nice to get these pawns going, and he needs to play c6 so he can play d5, but you have to look for these little counter strikes. And this is exactly what I'm looking for, because no matter what happens, either he takes or I takes, he'll have to, if I take, he has to take back with a piece, and he's going to be left with these doubled isolated pawns, and that's what I want to go for. I've got a big weakness that I can attack after that. And so that's how the game went. Let's see. He took on e5, and I took with a knight. He went bishop to e8. He didn't want to allow me to take his bishop. He wants to keep the bishop pair, which is one thing that black got in compensation for the damaged pawn structure. Let's see, so I go knight df3, and he avoided the queen trade, which is reasonable. I go queen e2. I didn't particularly care about the queen trade one way or another, but I guess in the endgame I would have an easier time of it without the queens on, so probably a smart idea to avoid the queen trade for him. Let's see, he goes rook d8 now, and I went rook f to e1. I was thinking, I could have opposed rooks immediately on the d file, but I was thinking maybe I could catch this bishop hanging. Maybe there's a good discovery here. But he plays bishop d6 immediately, so I didn't manage to do that. And so now I just gave in and grabbed the pawn over here. The chess engine says that had already been hanging for a move or two. The chess engine says I should avoid that impulse and keep playing with my pieces. It's tough, I guess, to avoid things like that, especially if you don't see an immediate continuation. But in terms of getting the best out of your position, it's more important a lot of times to get your pieces active than it is to grab a pawn and waste a couple of tempos. The queen goes out and comes back. So here's the chess engine continuation, which also ends up in the win of a pawn, but you'll see that the result is a much more active setup for white. So knight c4, hitting the bishop, knight to d5. So I can just trade off that bishop at some point. Oh yeah, the chess engine does. Goes in and trades it off. It's not repairing the pawn structure. Then queen to c4. Starting to put pressure on these pawns. Let's see, bishop d7, getting his pieces out. Bishop to e5, using the knight here and hitting the queen. Queen runs over to g6. Let's see, bishop drops back to g3, and the knight comes over to the king side. And now bishop to d6 finally wins this pawn. And you'll see I got the pawn without wasting any time going over to the side and coming back. So my pieces stayed active. So that's the best way to play it. It's not like queen takes a6, gives up the edge. I still have a one pawn advantage here, but my pieces are not so active. Let's see, and he should play something like knight d5 here. It's a better square for his knight, and maybe try and make life uncomfortable for my queen. I guess it's hitting the dark squares here. Anyway, queen to c4, say, is probably something I would try. f6, kicking my knight. Knight drops back to d3. Bishop to f7, looking at my queen. And then, I don't have to move the queen right away, I guess. a4 is the engine line. So you can see I managed to get that pawn rolling, but black managed to get his pieces active. So that's with best play. I'm still one pawn up, but anyway, black can defend more actively that way. He just started trading, and this trade helps me. That bishop was doing a good job there. There's no reason to trade it off for a knight. Maybe he thought something good would come of this rook d5 move, but I just go back with my knight. There's bishop d7. Go queen to c4 now. So I've gotten my queen back into the game, and I haven't suffered any harm. My pieces are still active, so he didn't really make the most of his chances there, and I have a decent edge here. So let's see. So he went rook e8, and I went queen h4. I wasn't especially keen to trade, but I was thinking I could inflict some damage on f6 there. So he defends the knight with the queen to d8, and now I just push the a pawn forward. I didn't see. I mean, if I take with the bishop here, he can take with the queen. I can exchange and damage the pawns some more, but then we're in an endgame with even material, except I have an extra pawn on the side. I mean, it's probably a winning endgame, but I think I would rather play with the queens on in this position. So he went with bishop f5, hitting my pawn. Yeah, he's got pieces that can get active too here. I have to be careful. So at this point, the chess engine would take on f6, and there's a nice little point here I missed. Let's see. Bishop takes f6, hits the queen, and if the queen takes the bishop, then rook takes rook is mate. So he has to throw in this rook check first. But even here, if queen takes bishop, rook to e8 is mate. So so he has to take with the pawn. So I get to keep the queens on, and I've messed up his pawn structure. This is all because he played bishop to f5. So in this position, when I went a4, that's a fine move. It's too early to play bishop takes f6 because his bishop is defending the back rank there, the e8 square. But when he played bishop f5, now this tactic works, and I should really just grab that knight immediately, because it's going to result in his king being exposed while the queens are still on the board, and that would be really good for me. Let's see, I didn't spot that idea. I traded rooks at this point. I was trying to see how he would take back. If he takes back with the queen, then I can take the knight and maybe win a pawn here. So he has to take back with the knight. And, well, once again, I decided not to trade queens. It seems like it doesn't really help the situation here. So I went with c4, kicking his rook. And let's see, he went for this trade. He traded here, which was, I think, a good move. It activates his queen. Let's see, I take, and he takes back with the queen, forcing my king back. And then this next move is the move that really gives the game away, although he's probably losing anyway, but it'll be a slower game, a longer game. Let's see, he could play something like f6 to block my queen's view of his back rank and the e7 square. Let's see, I might play something like queen f4, hitting his bishop. And now he can take this pawn. Queen takes b3. I grab a bishop. He grabs a bishop. Let's see, I can take on c5, and he can give a check here. And well, let's look at this. He now has time to defend this pawn. He's got his back rank secured, and I'm just one pawn up. But this is a passed pawn helped by a queen. I think the chess engine rates this as a pretty easy win for white. So he's still losing even with best play, but queen c2 runs right into this tactic, which I was fortunate enough to spot during the game, queen e7. So it hits the knight here, threatens mate, and it also guards the f8 square, so the king can't come over and defend the knight. And if his bishop goes to defend the knight, I can just take the bishop, and he still has no time to take my bishop because I will take his rook with mate. So I thought I was really just winning here, but he found a nice rejoinder. It's queen to e4. I totally missed this move, but it defends the knight this way. So right here, I didn't find the best move, and I ended up trading queens. Maybe I was a little rattled because I didn't notice this queen e4 move ahead of time. But you have time now, and there's a really good move here for white. So see if you can spot the best move here. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away. Actually, there's two best moves, it's either bishop to e5 or knight to e5. Either one works. So if you thought of either of those moves, give yourself some points. So give the example with bishop to e5. It's a great idea. It's normally, I guess you don't think of it because you're pinning this bishop. Like he could normally, in other circumstances, maybe he could attack that pinned piece with a move like f6 and try and win it. But in this case, queen takes knight is mate, so he hasn't got time for that. He's got to do something about the mate threats, and there's no way to stop all the mate threats except by sacrificing large amounts of material. So it's a simple win from there. So that would be the fastest way to win the game, and I just didn't spot that. But that's a nice tactic. I think it's kind of hard to see somehow. In the same way, I didn't see this move, defending the knight through my piece. I didn't see this move, blocking. Yeah, there's something funny about that setup that I find hard to see in advance, I guess. Anyway, it's a nice tactic if you can remember it. So he went queen e4, and I traded. And, well, it's a winning endgame, but it's a lot more work, and things can always go wrong. So if I had that middle game win, I should have gone for it. Anyway, I went knight e5 here. Chess Engine thinks actually knight d2 is best. But let's see, there's lots of things that could go wrong here. So after knight e5, if he had gone knight c7, he would have been able to hold on to these pawns. So we're sort of exchanging minor mishaps here. He played f6, and I bring my knight here, and now he's got no way to defend this c-pawn. So these mistakes all leave white with an advantage. I had the advantage here, and after his mistake, my advantage gets bigger. So I'm probably winning the whole way, but not keeping the biggest advantage all the way. Let's see. He goes king f7. I took on c5, hitting his bishop. He goes bishop to c2, hitting these pawns that are on light squares, and I can push this pawn forward, and my knight is holding on to the a pawn. So being able to take that c pawn with my knight was a big improvement to my position. So if he could have stopped that, it would have been more work for me to win this game. Let's see. He goes knight c7 now. I push on with a5, so my knight is free to move. So he goes knight e6. And right here, there's another nice endgame technique, something to keep your eyes on in the endgame. He's offering this trade, and I didn't want to trade because we're in opposite colored bishops. But of course, you have to work out the details. And after the trade, there's no way to stop this pawn from queening. His king is too far away, and his bishop has trouble getting on this diagonal. So the idea here is that bishop here right away. This would actually maybe be possible because he could play the bishop there and move the pawn forward and stop my pawn from queening that way. But I have the move f3. And then he can't stop it. He's got to move his bishop somewhere else off the diagonal. I push on and I'm getting a queen. So that is why knight takes e6 in this position works. Yeah, it's this position, knight takes e6. But you really have to calculate that out. So I don't know if I was getting short on time yet or not, but I should have paused to calculate it. So it's a question of, after the exchange, you can see right away that the king can't stop the pawn from queening. The question is, can the bishop stop the pawn from queening? And then you just have to notice this f3 check after the bishop comes to e4. The only square that can stop that pawn is bishop to e4, and you can chase the bishop off of that diagonal. So if you spot those two ideas in this position, then you should be able to calculate your way to a win. Anyway, I played knight to d7, which is, if you can't calculate a win, keeping the material on is the way to go in general. Knight to c7, so knight to b8, kind of a funny place for the knight, but it's hitting this pawn, and so he has to do something about that. He went bishop d3, so he decided to trade pawns here rather than just defend. I guess it's the same problem. If he went here, bishop to e5, I would kick it with f3, and he would lose that pawn anyway. So we get this trade. And now I've got these two passed pawns. And so the win is getting easier. I start to bring my king over. Let's see, he plays king e6. And here I almost made a mistake. I was just going to walk my king over. But if I had played king f3, he has this check. I was muttering about this during the game. I don't know if you caught it. But that would be one way to throw the game away. And it's easy to do, particularly at the end of the game when you start moving more quickly. So anyway, I spotted that in time, played knight d4 check. He went king d5, and now I bring my king over. Let's see, he goes knight a6. The more stubborn way to play this is with knight e6. Now the trade doesn't help. His bishop is in line to stop these pawns, so I definitely want to avoid that trade. So knight f5, you can play bishop a6, park the bishop here in front of the pawns. Let's see, knight e3 check, king c6, getting the king over there in front of the pawns, and bishop to c3. I mean, the chess engine gives a advantage to white here, but but black is putting up a stubborn fight, and it will take me a long time to try and break this down. I have to maneuver the knight over somehow to a dark square, maybe over here, without provoking a trade of this knight, and use that plus my king to push those pawns forward. Could be tricky. The other way to play it is to use these pawns to keep his pieces on the other side of the board and start trying to create weaknesses over here. Maybe get some pressure on these pawns with the knight on that square and the bishop here. So anyway, there's ideas here, and white should be able to win one way or another, but it would be a longer game. Let's see, he went knight a6. And I can just push on with b5 immediately. So it's kind of helpful. He went knight b4, I go a6, and now he's can't find anything better, and the chess engine didn't find anything better either than just sacrificing to get rid of those pawns. But now I'm a piece up, and I just have to make sure I don't lose all the remaining pawns. So let's go forward. I was a little curious about that g3 move, but turns out there was no way to save that h-pawn, so maybe if I had spotted that idea sooner. Yeah, I could have put the pawns on green dark squares first and then moved my king. That would have been maybe a better way to play that. But this turns out okay too. Let's see. Is this an interesting line? Knight e2 is the chess engine suggestion. King d6. Knight to f4. Hitting the bishop. Oh yeah, the point of knight e2. That was it. It's threatening this, threatening that check. So the king needed to move, or the bishop. So king drops back. Knight f4 hitting the bishop. Bishop moves, and then f3 kicking the bishop, and then knight to h5. So that's one way that I could have maneuvered it. Picked up these pawns, and then converted that way. Let's see. I just started bringing my king forward. And he played king to c4. I guess he was trying to harass my bishop. I went knight to f5. I don't mind a trade of bishop for knight here. He goes g6, and I saw that I had this check, hitting the king with check. King went to d3, and then I grabbed this pawn, so I get a pawn back that way. He goes king e2. Now he's going to try and mop up these pawns. I just need one pawn. I need to make sure I have one pawn at least to win this game. Let's see. So I went with knight to g4. And yeah, I think it's all over here. He could have tried to chase my knight off with this move, h5. But after knight e5 and king takes, I can take here on g6. And he's still not making any progress. Whenever this pawn comes forward, I can just take it. It's on a dark square, so his bishop can never take it, and should be able to win that. It's even the right-colored rip pawn. So that's a win too. Let's see. He just traded for the knight at this point and grabbed a pawn. But now this is a pretty straightforward ending of the game. I just have to hold on to this pawn so he can't take it. And I have to make sure his pawns don't get a chance to trade themselves or force a trade. And then I just run him out of moves, and my pawn comes forward. I win his pawn and my pawn comes forward. So after many more moves, he played this unnecessarily long. There we go. He finally resigned after I played g7. Anyway, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon. Bye.